right. Well, good evening. My name is Jen Lunsford. I am a candidate for New York State Assembly in the 135th District. That covers Webster, Penfield, East Rochester, and Perrington. I am joined here tonight by County Legislator and Educator John Baynes. John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is John Baynes. I'm a teacher, have been for 44 years. I taught it for 2 years at Aquinas Institute, and I'm very proud to say that I taught for 39 years at Fairport High School. And I'm now in my third year as a teacher at Our Lady of Mercy School for Young Women. I grew up in East Rochester, and I lived in Palmyra for quite a few years when we raised our children. While I was there, I served as village justice from 1982 to 1992. I spent 30 years as a leader of the Fairport teachers. And, my passion for service and advocacy is at the heart of my work as a professional. And I'm super excited about our topic tonight to talk about teaching and learning online. I don't know that there's anything more pertinent to many of the families with children, if not most of the families with children in the 135th Assembly District and beyond.
That's why I'm so glad that we have you here. Also, given that you are a county legislator, I want to give you a moment if you want to just give us a quick county update, since you would have pretty immediate information for us.
Well, I've been tweeting out and posting on Facebook the daily updates on the COVID-19. I'm very proud of the whole team throughout the county, our local electeds in the town of Perrington, Karen Hanna, Meredith Stockman Broadbent, the rest of the town board members, our village of Fairport Mayor Julie Domaratz and her four colleagues. 4 of the 5 members of the Fairport Village Board are ex-students of mine, so I'm very proud of them. And the East Rochester Mayor John Alfieri and his group, they're doing a great job. At the county level, we have a combination of holdovers from the Donalfo administration, like Dr. Mendoza and Corinda Crossdale. And I'm really pleased with Adam Bello with his steady and focused leadership. And I think that, at the local level, we've seen that leadership matters, and I'm very proud of what the county's trying to do. The reality is, however, that the true leaders are not politicians right now. The true leaders in our community are our medical community, and I'm so amazed by them. I'm a cancer survivor myself, so I'm well aware of how all of us rely in ways that we don't always understand on the efficiency, the proficiency, and the generosity of our medical community from top to bottom, from the people who clean the rooms to the highest paid surgeons and doctors who direct our medical community. So, I think the update from Monroe County is we have a fantastic community where we pull together and we all get on the same side of the boulder and try to push it. But this is a big boulder and it's going to take a while. But I'm very excited. There's some things we're going to have to deal with later. We're going to have to deal with the fact that revenues for local governments will be devastated by this event. And that conversation is something that we should be putting in the back of our minds, but recognizing it has to be on our minds. We're going to have to step up and deal with the fact that we're going to have to make incredibly hard choices going forward, both at the county level, the town and village level, and at the state level.
Thank you for that. And thank you for everything that you've been doing. I know as a citizen, I've been very grateful for legislators like you and like Adam and people who have just been continuously giving us information in a timely manner. I think that's a big difference that I've seen between local government's response and the federal government's response, is the way information has been communicated. And I think that we'll end up doing another town hall in the future about kind of what the path forward is here.
Well, I think that would be great, and I could certainly love to join, but there'd be others as well who could, join and contribute to that.
So let's move on to the topic at hand, which is online learning. And I think I want to start with just hearing a little bit about what you've done to transition your classroom online, what subject you teach, and what are you doing?
Well, I do want to talk kind of for context about being careful about talking about online learning. So let's get to that next. But, in my case, anybody who knows me knows that I'm from the mimeograph era, which you're too young to remember, I'm sure. But I go back to teaching with almost no technology. In fact, the dominant technology of my career has been chalk. Mm-hmm. And I'm not joking. I mean, truly. So writing on a chalkboard. So I'm not a huge proponent of technology as replacing the old school way that we teach and learn. And I think that in many ways we have bought into technology because people just love the whiz bang excitement of it. And in fact, I think the schools have purchased hundreds of millions of dollars of technology, which over the last 15, 20 years, which has not paid off at all and has ended up in the junkyard. But having said that, when I was at Fairport, they make a great effort there to work with technology as a supplement and a complement to the learning experience. When I went to Mercy, however, I was in an environment that was very different in that they were committed that every child will have a device. So they have what's called one-to-one, where every single child and every single faculty member has a device. In their case, they use Surface Pros for the 9-12 teaching learning community. And they'd spent 10 years working on this. They have an IT director who is, I'm shocked he hasn't been headhunted out of Our Lady of Mercy. He's an elite IT man. They have a surf shop where the girls go and they can make sure there are any problems. They're constantly troubleshooting. So at Our Lady of Mercy, before I arrived, they'd spent 6 or 7 years totally committed to making these devices work to support learning. Every single teacher's on Google Classroom, which is a program that our teacher friends out there will know. And it's kind of a Facebook feed with super features that permits you to interact with your students and for them to interact with you to provide, give them information and go back and forth, assign assessments to them, collect assessments, etc. So in myself, I'm more old school, more of a hard copy guy, more of a discussion-based teacher. I teach English. Currently, I'm only teaching 12th graders. So that's, by the way, a subject that lends itself to online learning extremely well, which I'll explain further. So when we transitioned to 100% online, we actually began what's called synchronous learning, which probably almost no one is doing. And what that means is that we're literally following the school day in real time. My homeroom is signing in. They say the pledge at 7:50. Mm-hmm. And the classes happen. We have 57-minute classes. And they happen in the actual real time that they would happen, were we all together in a big brick box on Clover Street. So we're doing synchronous learning 4 out of 5 days. It is tough because it's a lot of screen time, but we were able to do that because we had the capacity, the equipment, and the learned experience of all the members of the community, of the learning community. So we were able to transition to that. Now, I'll talk more about this, but the fact that you can do this is not necessarily a reason to completely do it. In other words, a lot of schools don't have the capacity to go online to the level that Our Lady of Mercy has gone online. And yet the very fact that you have the capacity doesn't mean that you should exploit the full extent of the capacity. As an analogy, after I got diagnosed with cancer, I decided I got to get one good car before I die. So I bought a car with a powerful motor in it, and I looked down and it can go 165 miles an hour. At least that's what it seems to say it can do. I have no intention of ever driving it that fast. So the fact that we can use these powerful technological tools for teaching, we want to think very carefully about how we're using them so that they're not oppressive, or also that we're sensitive to children and to their families and to their circumstances. And we can kind of drill down into that as we go forward.
Well, you're kind of transitioning already into my next question. You wanted to talk a little bit about, the danger of moving down this path too far. And I want to talk a little bit about the digital divide. So as you were already starting that discussion, why don't you just continue in that line of thought?
Sure. So let's talk about some of the critical variables around online education. The first one that we need to talk about is the fact that not everyone is equipped for socioeconomic reasons or for personal circumstances. They don't have access to the internet. Our schools have done a great job. I've been reading about the Fairport schools and other schools providing hotspots to students. I know our school, we went out and purchased a whole bunch of hotspots from Verizon and gave them to students. We had a small number of students, maybe, I don't know, I'm going to guess 10 or 15 who needed them. But we can't assume, and in fact, public education in particular would be liable for significant legal action were they to assume that all children have equal access to the digital world. So, and with our libraries closed, my wife is a longtime community librarian, and we know the libraries are the critical factor in trying to even up people in digital poverty, if you will, and making sure they have availability to Social Security and all the elements of the world that now are only accessible through the internet. So you have a situation where you have to be extremely sensitive to the fact that not all children will have a device, and nor will all children have connectivity. That's the first issue. And that's something that policymakers, teachers, parents, and community have to keep in mind, and I'm sure they are. The second thing is you have to think about the client first. And, you know, we have a pre-K to 12 educational system that we're talking about here. My son is he's a college professor. He's teaching online. The same ideas pertain to him, but let's stick with pre-K through 12. And so if you think about our pre-K kids, they're a year out of diapers, 2 years out of diapers.
That's my son. My son is 3.5. So we're
yeah. So if we talk about your son going to synchronous learning online, where he's doing 6 hours a day on a computer in a year and a half, I mean, clearly that's an atrocity to even think about that. So we have to recognize the profound diversity in terms of age appropriateness of our clients. My students are driving automobiles. Some of them are going to be in the Marines next year. Almost all of them will be in university living autonomously. So we have to be careful when we talk about online learning in that we have to start with the client and take a good look at what the client has, where the client is, what the resources of the client are, what the experiences are. And we can't shove things down the throats of learners who don't have the executive skills or the other factors required to adjust to online learning. So I think that, that's a factor. And then there's the third major variable is content. Some content is really difficult to do online. And if we start saying, well, whiz bang, online is the way to go, you might be talking about something you are teaching to a specific group of young people. Be careful about that because it might not export. Mm-hmm. So in a minute, if you want me to, I'll talk about a typical lesson that I do and give your viewers a sense of how I'm doing it. But I want to say before I do that, that doesn't mean it's the right way to do it for another subject, for a math teacher, for a science teacher, etc. And I think that my general rule is that online learning, it'll never approximate the beauty of live learning, but in this circumstance in which we're in, it's amazing and wonderful. But we should judge it based on what really high quality teaching and learning looks like. If we're just saying, well, at least we're online, at least we're doing something, that's not enough, because if it's not a high quality experience for students, it's not worth doing. So, when teaching is at its best, it works for kids. So we want to make sure that any online work we're doing, and if we can't do it at that level, we shouldn't do it, is really working for kids. And I can talk more about what I think that looks like.
I worry a little bit about the social emotional losses that kids have learning in a individual environment where they don't have their peers to bounce off of, where they don't have a teacher watching them to make sure they're engaged in what's happening. Are you able to do anything like that using technology? Can you see your students when you're talking to them? How's that working for you?
Yeah, so we're using Google Chat. It's a very good program, but I can only see about 4 or 5 students at a time, their faces. Now, even that, I mean, let's just talk about that a little bit. So it's 8:02 in the morning, you're an 18-year-old, and, you know, your 66-year-old teacher is staring at you through your computer. His big ugly mug is up on the screen, and, you know, literally you're in your bedroom. So it's a little oppressive, actually. And so some of my students turn their cameras off, and I'm sure some teachers don't want them to do that, because obviously you collect data from the face.
Yeah.
You know, the human face puts out more data and because you're an attorney and a communicator and a great candidate, you know that reading and reacting to people is everything. But the flip side is it's also, the technology is a little intrusive. So I can see them, and they 4 or 5 of them at a time, as soon as they speak in Google Chat, they pop up on the screen if their camera's on. Otherwise, it'll be like a graphic will be on the screen. Now, I think most of our friends in the public schools are using Zoom. And when you're using Zoom, you can see everybody if their cameras happen to be on. So you get an array and you can see the whole group. But, you know, your point about social emotional is really critical. Most of the feedback that I've received from students, we've been at it 2 weeks, has been gratitude. You know, in Catholic school, we start every class with a prayer. And I've had 3 different girls pray a prayer of gratitude for the technology, for breaking down social isolation, for giving them something really meaningful to engage in and discuss. So as much as it's both intrusive, but at the same time, handled properly, it's very reassuring, it's connective, and I think that's important. And one of the things that they can do is they can Google Chat among themselves. They can control the technology. So in small groups, they can do that as well. You know, Jen, I'm having a little low battery warning. This is sucking my battery like crazy.
I'm seeing that.
Yeah. So Patricia, hang on a second. I got to get this thing plugged
It's okay.
in.
You plug in, I'll vamp. I'll vamp. Something that, worries me a little bit as a parent of a preschooler. You know, my son's in the 3-year-old program, not the 4-year-old program yet. But, you know, he has circle time in the morning. He engages with his classmates. They listen to story time together. And I find when I try to do that myself, he's just not as engaged. But I found some circle time videos on YouTube, and he sits down and watches them. Because in a way, it's mimicking that group environment, and he can see what looks like his peers performing the activity. And so much of preschool is the social emotional. So, you know, that's what I fear with some of our younger kids, our kindergarten, our first grade. And I'm hearing in some of our suburban schools that they're not doing any kind of online learning. They were sent home with packets. So that's a concerning thing for me with some of the younger elementary school age kids.
Well, you know, I'm gonna speak briefly in defense of packets. You know, if you teach math, I don't do packets. Okay, I haven't done a packet in 40 years, right? Does that mean I'm a great teacher? Not at all. It means that I'm teaching reading, writing, speaking, and learning, and and reading. And what did I say? I gotta go through. I'm messing with my phone here. Thank you for plugging it. I just plugged my phone in. So I teach speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And I do some grammar work, but not typically with a packet. But we have teachers who have to use packets for basic skills, particularly foundational skills for numeracy and literacy. But if that's the entirety of the program we're delivering to children, then, you know, obviously you could get out the old workbooks that you had from the year before. We wouldn't need an educational system to deliver that. So I think I mentioned earlier that I spent the day, a good part of the day, watching Mr. Rogers today. And Fred Rogers is a truly gifted educator. What he did, and what I found brilliant, is that he watched television and saw what was on it for children. And he recognized that the most powerful technology of his era wasn't being exploited in the best interests of children, used in the best interests. So he, and I won't get into the film, but I was deeply touched by the way he reduced all of his message down to a very simplified message of love. love for children. And in fact, tomorrow I'm going to start my classes with this. I learned today the sign language for friend, which I did. I can't believe I didn't know that. I'm so embarrassed, but I think it's such a beautiful image of expressing that idea. So, not everybody can do what Fred Rogers did, and everybody is interested in the social emotional development of children. And this is kind of where parents come in, and this is where a lot of my colleagues in teaching have really stepped up. I'm hearing dozens of stories of teachers who are sending personal notes to students, teachers who are leaving gifts for them on their doorsteps, reaching out through their parents, even if they're not conducting the traditional business of school and the hyper normalcy. Kids love routine, as you know, from your child. And schools are really good at routine. That's for sure. Sometimes they're too good, but kids do thrive on it. And one of the things that we're doing now with our online learning is we're trying to establish some modicum of routine and normalcy around the learning environment. But again, the younger the learner or the type of learner, I have students who will never speak in class. And you can't, that's stylistic. I'm an extrovert.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I when I was a young teacher, I almost take it personally, but that's their style. It's interesting that I'm in the online environment with some of these students and they're on the chat mode. So when you're in Google Chat, they can type in their thoughts and comments on the issues that we're dealing with. So there are some kids who actually will find online learning more hospitable to their learning style than being in a crowded room, with a bunch of other people for whatever reason, right? Because human beings are incredibly complicated and our students are all human beings. So we have to keep that in mind as well. And the flip side of that is true. For some of our students, the online learning environment is a toxic environment. And as we think about how we're going to go forward as a state, as a nation, we want to be extremely sensitive to students for whom this is a very retrograde way to learn. This is not a positive experience for them. And there shouldn't be any judgment or stigma associated with the fact that not all students will lend themselves to this type of a learning situation. We have to remove judgment from that.
Yeah, and I think that's true of the parents as well. I'm hearing from so many parents the frustrations that they have trying to support their kid in whatever their school environment looks like now, while also not running a full-time homeschool. I think teachers are professionals. You've done this for decades, went a long time to school to learn how to do this. And you have these parents who don't have those skills, who don't have the knowledge of how to communicate effectively, banging their heads against the wall, trying to get their kids to fill out a packet and to do their homework and to stay on task. I'm wondering what kind of advice you have for parents.
Well, I think the first advice is, don't try to do that. I mean, it's not achievable. This is not a normal time. What your child will remember about this time. I mean, I remember when the lights went out in the entire Northeast in the late 60s. And I remember the biggest storm we had. We had a storm where the drifts went over our school and we were out of school for I think we missed 7 straight school days from an epic storm. And I don't think what mattered most during those times, and we could even go back, maybe some of our parents, a lot of our parents would remember the ice storm. And they may have been without power for a week. Well, what we as children remember from those days, and again, Mr. Rogers said this morning or this afternoon in his film, he said, if you want to help children, just remember what it was like to be a child. And that might sound reductive, but it's absolutely the truth. When I walk into a classroom, I remember that 49 years ago, I was in 12th grade. I vividly remember being a 12th grader and a terrible 12th grader. I was an abominably bad student, difficult to deal with. So I never let go of that. I always think about that. So if we think about those calamities of our past, the ice storm or whatever, what do we remember? We remember the feeling tone. We remember being together. I remember we had a gas stove, so my mom and dad lit the stove. We all I have 9 brothers and sisters. We all kind of huddled around the stove and were freaked out This is during the blackout, I think 67. And so I think that it's an important time to recognize that, yes, let's keep working. Let's try to create some normalcy. But the number one thing we do, and homes are built for love, right? Homes aren't built for learning. Learning happens through love. Schools are built for learning. Schools are places where love should always be going on, but they're built for learning. And so it's they're both built for the same, but in a different priority. So, my advice to parents, again, depending on the age of the child, the level of agency, the executive skills of the child, remember my earlier caveat, we're talking about a deeply diverse, a profoundly diverse population, young people from ages 4 to 18. But my number one advice would be, for instance, if the kid gets a packet, you do it first. Go through the packet and do it first. If your kid's reading a short story and you're not at work, read the short story. And then don't try to teach it to them. Say, wow, man, I don't understand it. Can you help me understand it? And then let your child teach you. Can you teach me how to do this subtraction? And in fact, we know that teaching is the highest form of learning. When you can teach it, you truly understand it. So I think that the number one role parents can play, this is a generalization, but is to just kind of create a tone of, let's make this fun. And I think that most of the schools aren't doing grades at all. We don't really do grades in our schools really for real until 9th grade anyway. So let's kind of put the whole idea of win, lose, pass, fail out the window and just take a look at it developmentally. And the other thing I would say is that parents know best. Nobody knows your child better than you do. And you're your child's first teacher. So whatever enrichment experiences that you want to provide to your child, whether it's watching a documentary together, there's so much rich material online, whether it's just having a little story time and reading stories, because to me, I'm biased because I'm an English teacher, but literacy is the key to everything, even if you're going to be a math major, an engineer, literacy. So, I say to the parents, give yourself a break. See if you can make this as much fun as possible. Make it collaborative with your child instead of supervising children. Children really respond to collaboration more than they respond to supervision.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. And some of the things that I've been saying to people is similar to what you are, which is just to give them permission to not be perfect and to not try to be a professional teacher while also doing their full-time job. My parenting philosophy is kind of like to be a pebble in the stream and not a dam, because when you're a dam, the pressure builds for everybody. And sometimes that means that we don't get anything done in a day. And sometimes it means we have a really, really productive, fun day. I try to let my son direct me as much as I can. And I hope that parents who are watching this can hear that and know that, it's okay if your kid doesn't finish their homework today. This is stressful for them too. Have your students been expressing any anxiety about the pandemic or what's going on?
Yes. So here, let me tell you about a typical class. So we'll all sign in. I or one of my students will say a prayer. It can simply be a meditation. Tomorrow we're going to sing the Mr. Rogers song, Won't You Be My Neighbor, for our prayer. My students don't know that yet, but that's going to happen. Then I'll say, okay, let's take 5 minutes just to share out some things that are on your mind. We have this powerful technology. Let's use it for social interaction. So I'll add, and a lot of them don't say much, but some will jump in and I'll say, what have you watched? Have you watched anything with your family? Any films, any series? Can you comment on whether they were productive, interesting, enriching? What have you been reading? What are some of your concerns? They know that I spend 10 hours a day reading about what's going on in America. I am an elected official. And I'm a bit of a news junkie. So I try to frame any issues for them in the most objective way. As a citizen, I don't have a duty, nor as a politician, a duty to be objective. But as a teacher, you have to teach the questions. You never teach the answers. Mm-hmm. And in my years as an advocate for teachers, I had a teacher not understand that. No, not many, but I had a few who didn't understand that you don't teach the answers. You teach the questions. And so we'll open it up, and the kids, they have anxiety, the same anxiety that the adults have. And the number one anxiety they have is, how long is this going to go? But if we think about my 12th graders, you know, I like to say to students, I know it's corny, but being a teacher is like automatically going to turn you into a corny person. So if anybody out there wants to be a teacher, beware, right? So I'll say, for instance, this would be a stock line that I would use. I'll say today is the 31st of March, 2020, the only one we will ever have. And I think we should try to do good work today. Now, I'll say that 2-3 days a week and in some form or another. So if you're in 12th grade, it's your 13th year in education. You've been looking forward to graduation. At Mercy, they have these incredible rituals that are 40 years, 50, 60 years old, something called May Day, ring ceremony where they get the juniors get their rings. Of course, the prom, the ball. And this is true in every school. At Fairport High, they have these amazing traditions, Brotherhood, Sisterhood Week, and so many precious things that kids really count on. Because as we said earlier, kids really are nostalgic. It's crazy how nostalgic an 18-year-old is. They really rely on certainty. They hate change. Children hate change more than adults do, and we don't like it. So my students have been dealing with a lot of anxiety about the fact that they're losing what looks like the majority of, if not the entirety of their senior year, and they're going to be in their houses. You know, it's not like they're ramming around a powder mill going to get, you know, Starbucks with their homies, right? So this has been, they've been robbed by circumstance, right? By circumstance. And I'll tell you, they're inspirational. Even though they have anxiety about it, they're upset about it. They're just beautiful people. And we can learn a lot from young people. Their resilience, their willingness to accept something difficult to accept. We haven't really, I think I've cried more than they have. I'm not sure, I'm not with them all the time, but it's been very emotional for me, not because I'm losing anything. I feel like every year I have is a bonus at this point in my life, but I'm really sad for them because they are losing something. You know, one of my students got into college yesterday at Holy Cross, and she didn't get a chance to, you know, kind of be with her friends and talk about it. And they're all learning what colleges they're going to. And yeah, I guess they can send a text to somebody or something, but you know, there's nothing like a hug, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's just a really tender time for the mental health of everybody. And it's my primary concern about my students, is their mental health right now. So, you know, I'm rambling on a little bit about your question about social emotional, but
I think it's imperative, and I'm concerned a lot about our student athletes too. Especially, I keep thinking about these poor kids who didn't get to play March Madness. The last time they're going to play an organized sport, for the vast majority of them, they worked so hard, and they just were completely robbed of that. A lot of our high school students, the last time they're going to play anything organized, and they've been working for years. It's just breaking my heart. And I wasn't even an athlete, you know.
yeah.
It's something that you worked towards that just dropped out from underneath you. And I worry about those kids cooped up in their houses now without that outlet.
Absolutely. And I grew up in that world. My father was a prominent coach and teacher, and he's in a bunch of halls of fame for coaching basketball. And I remember my last game that we lost, and I'm still heartbroken about it. You know, it was 49 years ago, right? So, but, you know, again, I'm so proud of them. The ones who are losing the entire spring season, I think the kids who are playing winter sports, they might not have had culminating events, and yet they didn't lose those magical, precious times. Because if you're a sports person, you know that the competitions matter, but even more important in the competitions is the sisterhood and the brotherhood of just doing something all out with other people and caring about them and supporting them and cheering for them. So I'm totally agreeing with you. I think we see kids losing out on a process that is heartbreaking, particularly for our spring sports, because most of our winter sports were done. We had some athletes who didn't get to go to the state tournament and this type of thing. And, you know, my heart goes out to them. So, so yeah, I agree with that. And then our musical our musical kids. We had our musical. A bunch of our girls were at a show at McQuaid, and the show didn't go on. Musical theater and music is so critical to the development of young people. We have the most amazing robotics program in our community, and we have the best volunteers who prepare kids for STEM learning. And so our robotics team was so fired up, and they were headed out, and literally right in the middle of the competition this year, they canceled it, and all of the kids had to go home. So yeah, it's I think everybody who can think about what the other guy's going through, and that extends toward parents. And my heart goes out to parents, grandparents. Like, I went to see my grandkids, right? So I stand outside my grandkids' houses. You've probably seen this on the internet, right? And I hold up signs to them, and I shout to my grandchildren from the street. I mean, I'm blessed that I'm able to go see my grandchildren with my wife, right? And we have 5 here in Rochester, and we were FaceTiming with them. And so, I love the spirit of the community. We're going to get through it. But yeah, there's loss, and that loss is going to hang around for a while.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about what the end game is here. You said there aren't going to be tests this year. I know that the state has waived their state tests. Are APs scheduled? How is any of this wrapping up?
Well, I'm very much a skeptic about the College Board. This year they changed their protocol and had all the kids pay for the tests up front. So they got all the kids money way back in October. And I'm cynical about that. I think they want to get the money, right? Because the kids can decide not to take the test. If you go to a public school, they can't require you to take AP tests because you have to pay for them. Like, you can't require anybody to do anything they have to pay for in a public school. So at our school, they make the kids pay for the tests. And so now they've canceled the test proper, but they're having a 45-minute version of the test. So it's 1/4 of what the test would be. It's not a reliable indicator. I'm very disappointed in the College Board. This is very much my personal opinion, certainly not Mercy's view or many of my AP colleagues' view, but I just think it's a charade because money's involved. As far as the New York State, I'll be shocked if they have the Regents exams. I think the lawsuits are going to come in our lawyer friends are going to come up with lawsuits, particularly for learners with disabilities, ELL students, students with 504s. The idea that, if you think about it, the idea that we are going to use an assessment that we spend, $1 trillion in the United States preparing students, nationally through the whole country. And all of a sudden, we're not gonna provide them with an educational experience, but we're gonna still give them the assessment. Mm-hmm. So, one of the things that I'm doing with my kids with our assessments is they're all experiential. I'm saying, look, let's do the assessments that are meaningful to your growth. It's not necessarily associated with some external standard. Mm-hmm. In my case, I know where my kids are going. My goal is to prepare kids for university. They're all going to different universities, and that's their next step. I mean, within a few months, they'll be in university. In 5 months, all my kids will be in college. So, I'm saying, like, what is the richest experience? I'll literally collaborate with them. We'll agree on what we're going to do. So I think that that's a big question. Like, so, okay, we have packets and we have work and we're maybe watching videos for what? Mm-hmm. And I think the educational community has a duty to be clear of what's the goal. I do think that assessments have never been, especially in the way that we've constructed them in this country, an adequate goal. I've said to my kids, you will be ready for the assessment, but there's something much more important than that we're preparing for. The assessment is the minimal expectation. The real thing we're preparing to do is to grow, learn, and be able to, again, to climb the steeper side of the mountain every year, climb the steeper side of the mountain in terms of the work we're doing, whether it's foundational skill work or whether it's other types of skills like literacy skills that spiral upward, right? So I think that's a question that parents should be asking, and the school community better have an answer to. To what end? You know, I think the main answer would be we don't want kids to fall back. We know that there's the summer slump, right? You've heard of that, where kids go off in the summer and their skills kind of atrophy. So I think one of the goals we should have for learning is to kind of think about this year in a different way, and think about the fact that September is the likely target date for kids to assemble in a big brick box.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe actually think about how we can get them September ready for whatever grade they're in, 5th grade, 6th grade. Maybe that's some professional development could happen once people can get out of their houses, where teachers teaching, say, 7th grade can collaborate with teachers teaching 6th grade or 5th grade and say, okay, with the assessments out of the picture, let's strictly look about preparedness.
I think that's a really good point. And I'm glad that you brought up some of these kids with learning disabilities, English as a second language students, kids with IEPs. From what I can tell from what I'm hearing from parents in the system who have kids who have 504s, all of these jargon we're using for people who don't necessarily know what this means, but basically kids who have special needs that the schools are legally required to meet. The schools have basically been like, look, we're in triage, we're barely meeting the educational needs of our typical students. What is happening at all for kids with more specialized needs?
Well, I don't know, because I'm locked up in my house too and interacting with my students. But what I can tell you this: our special educators are out there working. Mm-hmm. They're making connections, and they're all working. But the point I'm making is, come on, if we could do it this way and it worked, this is a way we would do it. Yeah. We don't do it this way for a reason. All right. We have the most inefficient system in the world. We bus kids up to an hour in parts of the state. We assemble them all in a building. The reason we do that is that they're in a place where learning is a priority, a place that's designed for them in mind. You know, special education in this state is some of the most elite special education in the world. We have phenomenal special educators. And the idea that we're going to, as you said earlier, that we're going to hold everybody accountable to the same standard when we haven't provided the inputs, and we haven't even met the legal duty, because that IEP is a legal document, as you know, and you can't provide it in this environment. That doesn't make anybody wrong. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean anybody's doing anything wrong at all. But it becomes wrong when you assess students as if all of the normal supports were in place.
Yeah, I think as long as we, as a community, continue to provide not just the educational and social emotional support, but there are some kids who receive speech and occupational and physical therapy through the school system. And I'm worried that some of them are starting to lose out on those services, that even when they are provided outside the school system, they're not coming to the homes anymore. So there's going to be, as you say, a lot of legal issues surrounding that, but also a lot of, just practical ramifications of people who aren't just in an educational slump, but they're going to be in a physical slump as well, because they're going to lose some of those skills.
Yeah, and there's no blame associated with it. It's just, I think the only blame that should be associated with any of these unfortunate and difficult circumstances is bad thinking. When we don't think about them in an appropriate way, and we act on bad thinking, we have to recognize that we're going to have to deal with the ramifications of this, think about how we're going to support all of our young people going forward, how we're going to manage it next fall, or whenever we get back into a normal delivery mode for services to kids. So this is a catastrophic situation for the United States of America. In many ways, it's different from World War II. It's different from World War I, in that, we were offshore. The conflict was offshore. Yeah, there was disruption. There was rationing during those wars. And my parents are products of the Depression and World War II. and my wife's parents. But this is a different animal. And again, my number one thing that I've said to people about online learning is, if you think that we're going to act like everything is normal for kids when nothing is normal for adults, you don't know anything about kids. Okay? Because kids are very much like adults. If nothing is normal for adults, nothing is normal for kids. Yeah. And we can't look at kids as, they're not empty vessels ready to be filled. They're dealing with this. They feel things. Kids feel things. They understand things, irrespective of their ability as students. I never met an American kid who wasn't a genius when it came to feelings and understanding what's going on in the minds of people around him or her. So when we have moms and dads who are out of work, we're all dealing with anxiety. All this is cascading into the lives of children and percolating through their subconscious and even conscious minds. So, I'm a big fan of saying, let's talk about it. Like, again, back to Mr. Rogers. What was that line? Patricia, what was that line? If it's mentionable, it's manageable. That was a line today in that movie. I burst into tears when he said that. He said, he's talking about this broken man he's interacting with. If it's mentionable, it's manageable. We have to mention the difficulty of this moment, and that's okay. And then we'll go forward from there.
I could just sit here and talk about Mr. Rogers all day because Mr. Rogers is my favorite. But, I think his approach to talking to kids about the big issues, even if you don't talk to them like they're adults, you talk to them about the issues because the issues still exist for them. You just find ways to message it that's age appropriate.
Yeah, well, let me tell you about the way I've been teaching too, because talk about age appropriate. So I'm reading complex texts. We're currently reading Joseph Conrad. We read a deeply psychological text called The Secret Share. Then we read Heart of Darkness. So we come online, I meet the girls. I say, okay, let's do some social interaction. Let's share out what's going on. All right, let's get to work. Then I'll say, okay, here's a frame question. Now we're going to go to a Google Doc. So we leave the meeting, we go to a Google Doc. All 20 of us are in the Google Doc typing in responses to the frame question. In some ways, it's more efficient than discussion because all 20 students can start commenting at once. Mm-hmm. So we're laying out all these, the girls are responding. First, I'll say, okay, clip an excerpt from the text that you find is a rich textual excerpt, and then comment on how it addresses the frame question. Like the frame question we were dealing with Heart of Darkness is, what are the moral implications of colonialism and imperialism? And so now the girls are all in there. Now I say, okay, I'll jump into the doc and say, everybody take a 2-minute break to walk around your room. All right, now come back, read something by at least 5 other classmates and pick something out that you think is genius that you want to elaborate on. We're going back to our Google meeting, and what we're going to do for 20 minutes is we're going to praise the ideas of classmates that really inspired us. So what you're talking about, doing, again, these are students who are 18, they have executive skills, where you're saying, let's make you guys interact with each other and recognize what a gift each other is to your learning. This is why our students want to go to the best colleges, not because they always have the best teachers, but because they want to be around students who energize them, who challenge them. You learn so much from your fellow students. Mm-hmm. So when teaching online works best, it simulates the experience of the classroom where it is collaborative, it is synergistic, in that 1-on-1, 3 people do better together than they would do alone, right? It adds up to 4. And, and I'm blessed that I'm working with a subject area, English, where we're able to kind of do some things like that. And then in Google Classroom, there's a chat. So I'll say, all right, let's not go to a Google Doc. Let's just go to the chat. I want everybody to write 3 sentences around this question. And then they'll write it. And then I'll say, okay, let's all read it and let's react to it. And then come back in and we can all see each other and chat about it. So again, I think that we're looking for ways online to simulate the magic of the classroom. It's not always possible, but I don't think we want to give up. Yeah. And again, if there's a theme to this discussion here, Jen, and I know we're coming to an end here shortly, but if there's a theme to it, it's think about the technology not as a delivery system, but as a way to create new ways of thinking. I want to tell you a story about Xerox. Can I tell you about a story about Xerox?
Please do.
Well, you might not know this, but in Rochester, we actually invented the interface. You know, we invented the click and point interface. And Steve Jobs, it was invented by Xerox R&D. Of course, we invented digital technology here also. And so let's not belabor that. That's a sad story. But a happy story is that when they invented the Xerox machine, the assumption they made was that the maximum number of copies that would be made with the machine was the number of carbon copies currently being made in the United States. Now, if you don't know what they are, that's when you would take a typewriter. When I was growing up, right? You type.
38. I had a typewriter.
I can't believe you remember this. So, and there's a friend of mine I went to the University of Rochester with, wrote a book about it. Not a close friend, but what he found was in his analysis of technology, and we live in the technology hub. I mean, I want to get it back. I think we can get it back. I'm a true believer. I won't be around to see it, but we're going to get it back here to Rochester. But what they didn't understand was the technology creates behavior. The technology is an opportunity to think differently, to grow what we do, not to do what we've always done. So what shocked Xerox was they thought, okay, we need X number of machines to make X number of copies. That's the top of the market. There won't be anything more to do than, let's say, make 100 million copies. Well, it turns out that human beings, when you give them technology, they love to fool around with it and do things with it. So what happened was everybody changed their behavior and they started copying everything. You know, they were making these silly memes. They weren't memes then, but they would be this Xerox comedy, and they stick them up on their wall and, you know, take a picture of their hand or some silliness of this sort. And so I think that that's something, as we go online, let's make it a time for creativity. Let's think a little bit about how we can use it, collaborate with students. In my case, the number one thing I do with technology, I say to my students, I don't know anything about it, help me. I just say, help me. Who can do this? Who knows how to do this? I know how to do it. Tell me what to do. This is what I say to them. Tell me what to do. They tell me what to do. They teach me. And that's another thing that parents can do. Just say to their kids, show me how to do this on the computer, will you? And you could have a lot of fun with it. So I'm getting fired up here, but I just wanted to share that Xerox story.
No, that's great. I do want to end a little bit by, first off, thanking you and thanking all of our teachers for the Herculean effort that you've put in to pick up your classrooms and transition them to a technology that most teachers hadn't used, that most students had never learned with, and making the best out of this terrible situation. And I think that this is a good opportunity to talk a little bit about the New York State budget that's up right now. I am a proponent of fully funding our foundation aid program, which is how the state funds our schools, for those who don't know. It's a program that has never been fully funded. And I know I have been pushing for fully funding it this year, and I don't know what that looks like anymore. I don't know what funding anything looks like anymore, given the World War-sized hole we just blew in our budget that already had a big Medicaid hole in it. The New York State budget is being voted on right now. It's being negotiated today. There's people in Albany doing that, and I was wondering if you had any thoughts on our school budget.
Yeah, well, you can forget about foundation aid being fully funded. In fact, even before this happened, the reality is that school funding is such a Byzantine and jerry-rigged situation in the state involving Save Harmless. It's not, we would have to do an hour on that and bring in real experts. I could talk about it for 20 minutes, and I'm not an expert, and a real expert could talk about it for 3 hours. But the reality is that the governor of New York is claiming that he needs to announce the aid formula on a quarterly basis. We cannot fund our schools on a quarterly basis. We can't. They just announced, I saw on my Twitter feed just before we came online, that they're pushing out the school budget votes until June 1st. And obviously they're trying to achieve more certainty. They just announced, by the way, I don't know if you know this, that spring break is canceled.
Mhm.
In New York. We're going to have continuously, whatever form education is in will continue, depending on, individual districts, what they're doing. So yeah, we're in an unprecedented time. I think that this is going to be a brutal time. Everybody's going to be hurting, and everybody's going to say my priority matters. New York is an incredibly high tax state, and I represent families that are paying 5%, the full value of their home, in property taxes. If they own a $100,000 home, they're paying $5,000 in property taxes on it. My home that I live in, the property taxes are almost $10,000. I'm happy to pay them, but I'm not in a situation where I'm on a fixed income, where other people are. So there are so many issues to deal with here, so many stakeholders. I wouldn't recommend that anybody take a hard position right now on this. I don't want to sound like an appeaser, but I think we have to deal with real politic in this moment. And so I think that the operating philosophy ought to be, we have to do the best we can for all the members of our community, prioritizing the most vulnerable members of our community. My philosophy has always been, as a teacher, as a brother, a sister, a parent, as an advocate, the most vulnerable people must be the number one priority. And not everybody agrees with that attitude that I have, but we also have to recognize that taxpayers are vulnerable people. There are people living East Rochester, they have homes that they've owned for generations and they can't afford their taxes.
Mhm.
So it is going to be a toughie, and I hope you win and you bring that feisty spirit, but also that fairness. And when we think about fairness, we have to think about more than one population. We have to think about all the vulnerable people in our community, and you can be vulnerable in many ways. So, I feel like I'm blessed to be in a position where I'm in a small role in government right now, but I'm not sure everybody in government is going to feel that way in 6 months. So I hope we're all up to the challenge, and I hope we can have a nice, clean election that's not influenced by this. I'm very concerned about our elections being affected by what's happening, because democracy is the lifeblood of our constitutional republic, democratic voting, right? Sorry about I'm doing a little bit of a rant, but.
No, you're encouraging people to come vote. So anytime anyone wants to go on a voting rant, yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that by November we've got this figured out, but I'm worried about our primaries. I'm worried about the special for New York 27 that's going to be happening in June. There's a lot of concerns we have about voting, and we have some constitutional barriers to absentee voting in New York that I honestly don't know how we get around legally. But
Yeah,
I think
stop. The U.S. Postal Service people are predicting the government's going to let it die, and it's going to die. And, obviously, if we are quarantining during voting times and we don't have the option of voting by mail, that's a devastating situation for our democracy. So, hey, okay, let's not end on a negative note. We'll solve this.
I think you and me together, we'll get it done.
No, we're going to need about 10,000 partners at least.
All right. Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate your time.
All right. God bless.
All right. You have a great night.
You too. Take care.
Bye.